Hello, and welcome to the Renegade. I'm your host, Andrew Howard, and for this episode, I'm going to be interviewing a gentleman named Shane Hazel. And Shane and I actually have a lot in common. Just like myself, he was also a Recon Marine, and he served in the military from 2001 to 2005. And he's changed his opinion and withdrew his support from the U.S. military, the U.S. government, and really any government for that matter. So he's become a libertarian, he's an advocate of freedom, he's the host of the Radical podcast, and is running for governor of Georgia in the year 2022. So I hope you enjoy the show, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Okay, you see me recording?
I got you.
Awesome. All right, Mr. Shane Hazel, thank you very much for coming on, and really looking forward to having this conversation with another Recon veteran.
Man, it's weird. Like, it's funny to have guys popping out now from this space. Like, we were talking a little bit beforehand, and like Jason Stapleton. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was a Recon Marine, and he started doing podcasts. And I kind of was like, yeah, if he can do it, then I could probably do this. And after my first run, I was like, yeah, let's do this podcast thing. So yeah, man, it's really cool to have you reach out and get in touch, and kind of share a lot of the same, not only background, but like your transformation now. It's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to have a little intro that I'm doing for you, but for those, for whatever reason, didn't listen to it. Shane and I actually shared the same job that we used to have in the Marine Corps, which is Marine reconnaissance. And Marine reconnaissance is one of the more elite jobs. It can be considered special operations, but generally about 70 or 80% of people quit in training. So really cool thing we have in common. And so that being said, I just want to dive right into it and ask you, I mean, how did you go from being somebody that carried a gun on behalf of the U.S. government to, you were very, very extensively trained, to now being a hardcore libertarian, somebody that really questions the government? How did that transformation happen?
Not fast and not painlessly. Like, just becoming, like, when you become a Recon Marine, you think you're a pretty good person in terms of your uptake, your skill sets, you're just to go into reconnaissance, which I mentioned maybe some of your crowd is anyway, or knows a little bit about. Like, it's not an easy process, right? Like, there's a mental and a physical and a soul grind that kind of goes into that kind of stuff. So I will tell you, it's not exactly the same in terms of the physical, but I'll tell you what, in terms of the mental, to throw off decades and decades of indoctrination and totally get rid of everything that you've been told. It's just it's tough. And so I guess my story really started when I transitioned out of Fallujah. It was late in November of 2004. And one of my buddies was also kind of going down this road to libertarianism. A lot of us are just very freedom, minded to begin with, right? Like, you're not in reconnaissance and all that fun stuff because you want to go out and just take orders. You want to go out and do, small unit type of things where you're solving problems on the go, and it's very entrepreneurial. So same thing with the idea that we were students. It's like we always had books in our hands, and I mean, hell, back then it was before technology. Like, we're ancient Marines compared to like what's going on now, right? So we read a lot of books, and a lot of times it was sharing books, especially if we were detached from our regular command, which we were at the time. And I read this book named Weapons of Mass Instruction by John Taylor Gatto. John Taylor Gatto, 30-year veteran of the New York school system, man. And he was teacher of the year multiple times while giving the school system the middle finger. And I was like, who the hell is this guy, right? And so I read his book, and there's a part that talks about why they don't teach American history in terms of education, the history of education to teachers in the American school system, right? Like, my wife, who I married, had no idea. And so I started reading this part, And he talks about how the American indoctrination system came from Prussia, right? They devise this, basically they're smart enough to turn, the widgets and knobs and stuff, but not, smart enough to question things, not smart enough to look out for their own destinies, to become entrepreneurs and things like that. Is like, listen, we need a population that can turn and work on machines and on assembly lines and things like that, and then just have monotonous jobs. And when it comes time for it, if they're told by the state and by the powers that be, go off and fight these bad people, because quote unquote, our freedom makes them hate us, then they'll go. And I was just like, holy shit, man. Like it was a moment where I honestly, I put down the book and I was like, they fucking got me. Like I had a revelation like right there. I reread that page, I don't know how many times. And I was just like, wow. And then I finished the book, in about another couple sittings. And it was just like, I read it twice. My mind was melting out of my ears. And, it's like, well, until I get back to the States, I'm probably not going to have access to more of his work. When I got back, I started hunting more of his work, and that led to things like Ron Paul. It led to things like Murray Rothbard. I became a constitutional expert. And then I became, a Federalist expert. And then I became the anti-Federalist expert, because there's always two sides to every story. And what I found, from the anti-Federalists, and I'll give a lot of podcasts credit here in a second too, but it's one of those things where, I saw it and it made sense, and you're sitting there going, I see why they don't teach this kind of stuff. Like knowledge is power, right? And when you understand what the prophets told us, 240 fucking years ago. Can I cuss on your show? I'm sorry.
This is a voluntarist anarchist show. You are more than welcome to. I mean, try and be somewhat appropriate, but
we'll
yeah,
be somewhat
absolutely
appropriate. But yeah, so it was like, man, I don't know. I kept going down that anti-Federalist road, and I was just like, these guys, they nailed it. And then, obviously, you get a lot of great podcasts out there these days, right? And I think one of the first ones that I found was Tom Woods, and I listened to Tom Woods so damn much that I was like, I got to get outside of my echo chamber here. Like, he's awesome. And then I found, I think it was like 2016, I found Dave Smith, and kudos to Dave Smith for, him and Robbie the Fire, even back then, were just, they were doing something different, and it was fun, and it was engaging, and it was just, guys having a hell of a lot of fun. I mean, Dave is a comic, obviously. And so, there's a lot of humor mixed in this, in pointing out just how ridiculous the entire narrative is, that is, the U.S. government, what we're doing overseas, what we're doing domestically. And that kind of, brought me full circle. Just tons of books, tons of reading, tons of history, tons of study, and, listening to people who had great arguments. So that's kind of how I got to here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
How about now? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah. So basically, I mean, you were deployed, you picked up some information, you actually read it, and you had a whole change of mind with that. So did you get out of the military shortly after getting that information? Was it like, okay, I realize what I'm doing is absolutely fucked up, I don't want to contribute to this monolithic system, I'm going to get out? Or was it, was there some hesitation behind telling everybody you're working with, bleeding with, sweating with, maybe even dying with, that you don't believe in this anymore? What was that process like of communicating with everybody else in your platoon, your company, etc.?
No, I mean, we were at, you deploy with 24 guys, and, there's probably 20 of them that you just consider absolute brothers, they're, and to withhold knowledge or anything like that, or thoughts or opinions. I mean, working together for almost, 4 straight years at this point, nothing's off limits, and that's the thing, is like, these guys, nobody minces words in these groups. They have a lot of fun. There's a lot of respect for, everybody who's in these teams, as long as you're not, malicious and a dick, right? And like, most of the time it's just one big group of dudes, it's family. So we ended up having like a mass exodus from that platoon. Of the 24 guys, maybe 8 stuck around and did the rest of their enlistments. And I think that was kind of an interesting thing to see all of that unravel. It's, I had started it. We'd passed around that book quite a bit. I don't know how it affected everybody, but I can tell you there's quite a few people in that group, that I'm obviously still, great friends with. And we talk about these kind of things. They see what I'm doing with this kind of stuff. And they're like, yeah, hey, good job, right on, and all that fun stuff. And you kind of reminisce with those kind of guys, but it's to the point where, they see it too. I mean, for me, I got out, man. I was that same year was my EAS date, so it wasn't. I didn't have time to go back into a training cycle or go out and go through like your green side, dark side workups and all that fun stuff. So it was basically, you're going back. You're going to have probably about 3 or 4 months, I think, is what I had in terms of leave saved up. And so I spent the summer basically at the pool training guys, how to swim and McQuist and all that fun stuff. And it was a fun little summer. And then I ended up back at UGA that fall so that I could start finishing out my last couple of years at UGA.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So let me, that makes me think, I mean, my process of getting out and your process of getting out, of realizing that maybe everything we're told is not moral, I've noticed in my own experience that a lot of the people in the military understand that what we're doing overseas is totally fucked up. The thing that really, really upset me and disturbed me was the amount of people that knew it was messed up, but buried their heads in the sand and wanted to collect a paycheck. And I think that mentality is very common among really I call them order followers. I know it's not a very nice name, but it's who we were. It's who they are. Anybody that's willing to carry a gun on behalf of the government and do what they're told. And that makes me kind of think about the implications of that in relation to this COVID stuff happening. I would imagine that there are people in government right now who don't fully believe in the official narrative of COVID-19, don't actually believe this thing is this horrible virus that we should all get this experimental injection for, but they just do their jobs, and that's the most common excuse that was used in the Nuremberg trials, as I'm sure you're aware. I'm just doing my job. I'm just following orders. They train you not to question things, really. Mm-hmm. And I totally agree with, John Taylor Gatto. I mean, I'm familiar with his work as well. I think it begins with the education system, because in the education system, you have to ask if you can go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And it's this authoritarian thing. You're a kid, you're all in this class. There's an authority figure there. So yeah, I mean, as far as doing what you're told and that mentality, how do you think that relates to what's going on right now with the COVID stuff and the lockdowns and people actually enforcing the lockdowns? And what can we do about it?
It's funny how fear gripped this country. I mean, you probably recognize the psychological operations that were put in place. It's the same thing that our government does overseas. It's, you're dealing with a population first and foremost that's had 24/7 news shoved down their throats for probably about, I don't know, let's just say mid-90s to be fair, right? So most people don't remember a time that we didn't have, not 24/7 news. Prior to that, they have, government indoctrination centers, whether it was just government indoctrination from, 5 years old till the time you were 18, or if you were indoctrinated by the military, or if you were also indoctrinated by the collegiate system, right? Like most of all these systems are run and subsidized of some sort by the U.S. government, and it all works on the same model in terms of come in, sit down, You don't get to associate with who you want to associate with. It's you're going to do what you're told. And so you've got a population that is absolutely very obedient, right? Like, I mean, you look at, what they've been told with police, even in their normal everyday lives, just obey the law. You won't have any trouble. Just be nice. You won't have any trouble. Don't question their authority. You won't have any trouble. You can challenge it in court. You won't have any trouble. Like, just do what you're told. And that's the thing is I don't think I've ever really been that way in terms of just do what you're told. I think there's always been this streak in me that's just like, I see what you're doing there. I'm going to try something, and I'll probably be that person that begs for forgiveness, right? Like that's kind of how I've always been. I just don't think there's a lot of people who are that way. You know what I mean? I think most people have accepted that they've been safe most of their lives. I mean, that's the thing is there's a subliminally, at least, you've been, most people have been safe most of their lives, right? They haven't come into any threat in those quote unquote institutions, which I think is a really sick word for them. But it's just basic, basic indoctrination from the time you're 5 damn years old in the compliance factor where everybody's like, oh, okay. Or it's like high school, right? Where everybody wanted to fit in and you just didn't want anybody pointing at you. Most people don't want conflict, right? So they're just like, the hell with it. I'll wear the damn mask.
Exactly. I was just going to say, I think that's why so many people wear the mask and that's like one thing that really just ticks me off is like, there are men who do not agree with this and they still put a mask over their face because they don't want to upset anybody else. And I think there's been a war really on both of the sexes, but especially I think emasculating men is a big goal of theirs, and whoever they is, you could call it, central banks, Rothschilds, whatever you want to call it. Like there is definitely a smaller group of people that is pretty secret that does have an agenda, and I think that's
and billions and billions and billions of dollars and a printing press at their disposal.
Exactly. That's I mean, so let me ask you that. I mean, speaking of the printing press, how'd you get into Bitcoin?
Man, I don't know. It was probably last fall, like probably coming out of summer, but going into last fall, I just kind of had this this itch, right? It was like, you know what, man, I'm seeing a lot of people doing some things.
Printing. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Just basically, more and more, printing is just basically, it's inflation. It's a tax. It's a hidden tax. And so when you understand Austrian economics, you sit there and go, okay, man, how much are they printing? 2 trillion? Oh, wow. That's no small sum, especially, given how much debt we've had over history. And you start doing the math and you're like, man, if the dollar's already at like 99% in terms of decline against what it was, back in 1972, 1971, it's not going to continue to, have a world, renowned type of store of value. And so I was like, I got to look for something different. The thing is everything you look at inside the US is based on the dollar. So you're like, well, this is probably, just kind of derivative of the first fact that you pointed to. What's new and what's different? Bitcoin, right? And Bitcoin's been around for a while. And so I started pouring into Bitcoin. Guy Swan, who is awesome. He runs Bitcoin Audible.
Yep.
Yeah, he's a good dude. I've had him on my show. He's helped me out with some troubles that I've had with Bitcoin. And it's definitely one of the really cool things is like you don't know what you don't know, and what you don't know if you're not into Bitcoin is the depths of its history already. I mean, it's a damn decade old almost, and like kind of, I said decade, but like mainstream decade, and it's a virtual unknown, I think, to most of the population, or I think the US dollar would already be dead. Right? Like if you really know, like, the information that's out there, where this thing came from, what it's based in, the fact that it's finite, the fact that you can keep this yourself and become your own bank, the fact that it's in, basically a hedge against the collapsing dollar. It's not that Bitcoin's going up in value, it's that the damn dollar is damn worthless. And so when you start to understand,
Could I ask a quick question on that? Okay, so you mentioned the dollar would be replaced, and I totally agree with that. And obviously, we want that because we don't want to. You know, the Iraq. I always say the Iraq War costed $6 trillion, and the money printer is how they made it happen. So it's literally a matter of life and death.
Sure.
But obviously, they are not going to want to just let go of their power. So as Bitcoin continues to become more and more ubiquitous, how do you see this contention happening? What do you think the U.S. government is going to be trying to do about it?
Well, I saw Janet Yellen just the other day, man. And she's talking about like an 80% tax on Bitcoin. And you're sitting there going like, oh, you know what? The thing is it's so disingenuous from them to even say this, because these assholes are paying attention to Bitcoin, right? Like, they know Bitcoin probably as well as anybody in their own portfolios. They're probably just buying as much Bitcoin with a lot of the dollars that they're printing anyway. So it's disingenuous for those people to sit there and say that. Now, do I think they'll try to do some shady shit with the people who are out of the know? I do. I think that's, really something pretty cool about the Bitcoin community, though, is like they don't care who you are. It's kind of like being libertarian. Libertarians and Bitcoiners, that Venn diagram is really, really almost overlapping, right? And so, it's like, hey, here's some information, here's a book, here's a podcast, here's whatever. Hey, here are the hacks that I've learned from myself. And we don't want people to get taken advantage of as Bitcoiners or libertarians. It's just, hey, man, you got a seed. I know you want to foster it and grow it. Let me show you. And so I think what's going to happen is you're just going to have, more and more people unplug and understand that you don't have to go through an exchange that is going to out you for spending your money. It's not going to, you can be anonymous. You can move things around. You can be the holder of your own keys in your own bank so that nobody can touch you. And, at the end of the day, what the fuck are they going to do? It's like, look, man, you even if you get me, you can't get my Bitcoin. On top of it, it really removes the necessity for force and coercion. Like, you can't, if there's no prize at the end of the day, it's what are you going after? What are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're in a tough position, because if you look at other countries that have banned it, it has not worked out very well. And historically speaking, if you ban things, they go up in value. Like alcohol, I know went up like 3 or 4 times in value during Prohibition. Right. And plus,
even China couldn't ban it. That's a huge thing, right?
Yeah, even like China, the most communist nation in the world, couldn't get rid of it. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I mean that's an amazing thing. Is like, and here's what happens with every time they try, right? It's like China took a shot to the jaw when they fucked with Bitcoin. You're talking about one of the most powerful empires on earth, and it didn't even stand a chance against Bitcoiners. And they're like, yeah, man, all I need is like an RF fucking signal, and we can blast that to the moon, and hey, guess what? We're good. We'll be fine. So I think that's one of those really neat things that says, maybe we better not mess with these people, but maybe we're going to have to either, find smarter people and offer a better service and a better product and a better form of exchange, or maybe we're probably going to have to get in with this kind of stuff. And that's really exciting for everybody, right? Like, that's when you go, oh, guess what? These people in magical positions don't really damn matter anymore. And they're not so magical anymore either, right?
Exactly. They're just people. They're just people like you and I. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the coolest thing about Bitcoin is like, I'm not saying it's going to render the government like totally. I mean, I know the government's going to exist, unfortunately, in some way, but if we can just take away their ability to create endless wealth, then I think we win. We basically win. So yeah, I think the other side is there are also some politicians that are really into it too. Like, I know we have Cynthia Loomis from Wyoming, and she's a full-on Bitcoiner. We got the mayor of Miami who's saying he wants Miami to be the Bitcoin capital of the nation. I know we have, I believe, a House representative from Texas, Republican guy, forget his name, but he's also pro Bitcoin. So it's interesting because it makes you wonder, like, the people at the very top probably hate it, and they're probably making some sort of plan to try and tear it down, even though it's not going to work, or they're just buying a bunch of it, which also I
Doesn't
think,
help them.
yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
I mean, really, they can either just capitulate, buy it, start working with it, or they can just try and like forcefully not anybody use it through just insane capital gains taxes, which will be avoided, I'm sure. Or just trying to, ban it, which you can't really do. And then there's also, they could try and shut off the entire internet, but I don't even think that's possible. And if that happens, then we shouldn't use email, or we shouldn't use Facebook or any other online service, So I think they're more or less kind of screwed on this one.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'll go back to the first currency, which is lead, right? And so it's like, listen, lead has saved America, man. And I say that in terms of like, I think this past year, one of the most draconian, despotic, tyrannical years I've ever, seen, right? And to think that they wouldn't have carried through even worse types of, I don't know, punishments and marginalizations and things like that for people that weren't willing to do what they told them to do, right? I totally think that we've lucked out. I say lucked out, but it's basically carried out to fruition why guns are very important. And so the interest rates, they can't mess with those right now. They can't really do a ton without hurting themselves in terms of printing. And it's going to be one of those very interesting periods as this transition happens, and as they are able to collect less and less from the people are also going to figure out that taxes are just control, right? If you guys can print all the money you want, taxes are just control. And if I can hide my money and my transactions from people, it's like, well, all right, now what? Now you got a dwindling government. You got people that are absolutely hated. Their likability index and everything else like that is in the tank. It's just, I don't know, man. To watch these guys flail and surround themselves with National Guard and all that kind of stuff, you just see it. You see the empire is imploding.
It's falling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. I mean, that's why I moved to Mexico, is because I mean, if you were to take all of the textbook necessities for a huge empire to fall, I mean, America has every single one, like, insane debt levels, endless money printing,
endless
huge
war,
military that's expanded. Yeah, endless war. What's another one? Social degradation. I mean, divorce rates are crazy high.
Controlled messaging.
Yeah.
Deep personing people online. I mean, it's censorship.
Yeah, and then total like blatant censorship. Yeah, exactly. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if I get banned for just talking about
the parallels are crazy.
I don't know how you're not banned.
Oh, I don't know, man.
Exactly.
I'm not big enough yet, and maybe that's the one thing I got going for me is like, it's just like, man, they like to hit those high notes where you stick your head up too high or they go for a hole.
Yeah, they do. They absolutely do. I think. Yeah, I mean, I saw this on Twitter, and I see it often. The revolution will not be televised. So I think there are a lot of people just like us who are trying to do everything they can to stop this stuff from happening. But the only thing your average Joe is seeing is just on TV, where you see all these people dying from COVID and all that. So let me let me ask you this then: if transitioning back to the COVID stuff, if I was like a super Karen type person, and I like believed you had to wear a mask, and I believe you should get this injection, and I don't think you should come in contact with each other. You should stay at home all the time and basically socially torture yourself, and which is it's a torture tactic. I'm sure you're aware, social isolation.
Yeah.
What would you say to those people? Do you have any like specific points you'd bring up about the mask or the vaccine? I mean, what would you say to try and show them our perspective?
So, as much as I just want to hit them in the face with all the facts, right? Like, you know, for me, you know, in the back of my head, I'm going, yeah, man, those NBC classes where you watch people like inhale shit and snap their own backs, and they talked about nano-sized particles that, you know, can't be stopped by other types of masks. Like, you know, that drill instructor was like, yeah, if you think you're going to put your, you know, shirt over your head, or that NBC guy that, you know, was at boot camp, if you think you're going to put your shirt over your head and not breathe this shit in, I got news for you, right? Well, that's all these masks are. And so, you know, not to mention, like, they talk about being clean shaven. They talk about, you know, just, you know, the proper attire if you're going to be dealing with something NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical. So, you know, that's in the back of my head. But the problem is when you hit people with facts, man, they just think, hey, screw this guy, man. He just wants to be smarter than I am. So a lot of times, it's a tactic that I've had a ton of success with, is you work with humanity, man. You lead with humanity, right? Like, look, I know you're scared, right? Trust me, I was scared in the beginning of this too, because I didn't realize, you know, what was going on. I didn't, you know what type of virus this was. Didn't know if the reports coming out of China were true, and all this stuff. You remember just kind of reaching into your humanity a year ago and going, you know, maybe this is serious, right? Like, you know, when they were dropping, you remember when they dropped that hotel on a whole bunch of people who had COVID in China, like totally
nuts. I wonder if that was just all acting. I don't know. I mean, it was so dramatic and just so playing on your emotions.
Right. You're sitting there going like, man, is this one of those outbreak moments? Is this like, could it be? And, you know, the thing is it's very possible that, you know, those guys have engineered some kind of bioweapon. So you lead with that humanity, man. And you try to find that soft spot, and then, you know, you can kind of pull into, you know, your evolution, you know, throughout time, and like, yeah, you know, and what got me out of the whole mass thing was X, Y, or Z, whatever that information is, whether it was ivermectin or vitamin D or sunlight or exercise or not being obese or 78 years old, like all these things out there. You just like, if you can sit there and talk to them about, you know, this stuff, and you've done your homework and you can lead with humanity, a lot of times you're going to be very successful. And at the end of the day, you know, it's just kind of, you know, common sense. If you're actually having a conversation and you're just like, hey, if you want me to wear a mask, or you want me to wear or take a vaccine, I understand you want me to do that. And you think that it's for, you know, humanity's safety. But here's the thing is if you believe these things work and you get these vaccines or shots and you wear your mask, then you should be safe from idiots like me who don't, right? If not, then they don't work, and you're just doing it to, you know, go out there and not be, you know, vilified by your fellow man, right? Like you're virtue signaling.
Yeah. I mean, that's the most ironic thing. And I'll ask people the same thing when I'm in the US. You know, I'll say, if your mask works, then why do I need to wear a mask? If it blocks particles from, you know, that doesn't make sense. Same thing with a vaccine. If your vaccine works, then why do I need to have the vaccine? It just doesn't make sense. And yeah, it's a pretty crazy thing happening right now. I don't think anybody over a year ago could think that the government could possibly be this authoritarian. So yeah, I think as far as where the future goes, I don't know where exactly you see this thing going, but in my opinion, I think traveling is going to be, it already is extremely difficult. I believe US citizens cannot travel to Europe now without a vaccination ID. So I see that coming. I think what they want basically is to have people living in a city, depending on the grocery store for their own food, you know, using their money that they just print all the time and, you know, direct deposit in your account all the time. So they got UBI going on. I think they want you totally dependent on this system. And if you don't get the vaccine, then your life is just going to be extremely difficult to live. So to me, it just seems like a very important thing to just move out of the city, to grow your own food, to not depend on government money, and to basically live a life as autonomous as possible, which some people would call crazy, but other people would say that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I've actually started that process now. We moved out to a mountain where there's about 8,000 acres out here of untouched, undisturbed wilderness. I mean, there are bears that weigh like over 500 pounds out here, and it's amazing. But I don't think having the energy and the skill sets and the adaptability that I have, this isn't a lifestyle for a lot of people, man. It's hard. It's hard work. It's one of those things where, if you want to be self-sufficient and you want to do it to a point where you're thriving, where you can feed, not only your family, but maybe your neighbors in a pinch, or at least have, skills to barter and crops coming in and a harvest of some sort, or wild game that you're managing, and food plots and everything else, gardens and electric fences and wells and backup generators. I mean, like
It's hard work.
It's not only hard work, but it's not cheap, right? Like there are economical ways to do this, but it is not easy. But yeah, it's I would encourage you, if you've ever thought, in this day and age, like that you can't go out into almost the middle of nowhere and survive off the land. I'm going to tell you right now, like it's completely possible. And there are a lot of places, where you don't have to be, super far. Like I live in North Georgia, right? Like it's a trip, and it'd be very painful for somebody to try to get to where we are, only to be met with, even more pain. So it's like, if you can be self-sufficient, it's very hard for people to tell you what to do, especially if you're peaceful, right? Like
Exactly.
if you're a peaceful person and you're just living, man, boy, you got a lot of things riding for you, man. It's almost, I don't want to say it's like a coat of armor, but it is, right? It's like, yeah, man, no, that guy fucked off all the way out to there. Like he's behind that much. No, man, like you're going out of your
don't
way.
mess with him. Yeah.
He's fine, right? Like that guy obviously just wants peace. It's like he doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want, confrontation. He doesn't want people around. And the thing is like it's that whole warrior, in the garden, right? You guys want us in the garden. That's it. Like that. It's like final warning. We're gonna start putting together people who are tired of being interrupted while they're in the garden, and we're gonna come and do our other skill set, which you're not gonna like at all. That's gonna suck for a lot of people, man. Like, and it's gonna it's gonna happen in some places, right? Like, I think there's some boundary lines. I think there's some areas. I think obviously when you have a bunch of very pernicious type of people who talk about destroying environments and at the same time living in skyscrapers where there's absolutely no natural life whatsoever. There's no indigenous life. There's nothing. Their carbon footprint is, whatever, it is. Not that I give a damn about carbon footprints, but like
Sure.
what you're saying is you're sitting there and you're a consumer. Yep. You're not a producer. You sit there and you consume everything that everybody else makes. You don't do shit in your high rise. You don't do anything, close to being a producer on this planet. And yet you're going to sit there and you're going to, trash guys like myself and, people that actually, feed themselves and feed their families and feed their neighbors. And man, like it's such a dichotomy and such a, I don't know, divorce cognitive dissonance. When you're, told to do whatever by these people. And at some point, man, it's just like, no, now what? What are you going to do? Right? Like,
yeah. I mean, it's like I think it was Jefferson said when injustice becomes law, disobedience becomes duty, and like that is where we're going. I mean, there are a lot of people in a position where it's like, okay, I do this thing and life is more convenient, or I don't do it and I can look at my grandchildren in the eyes and say, you know what, when the world became totalitarian and basically socialist or communist or whatever you want to call it, I actually did my part and I did everything I possibly fucking could to fight against that stuff. And man, yeah, that's something I think about a lot is because it's not easy being the kind of person to, speak out against this stuff, have everybody hate you. And we're getting to a point where there's a lot of contention between the state and people like us who just want to live free lives, don't want to have the government mess with us, all that. So
And say something about that real quick, if
Yeah.
that's cool. Yeah, I mean, obviously as a reconnaissance Marine, you do some hairy stuff, right? Like, I mean, especially if you were in some really hairy situations, combat, whatever. I mean, even a lot of the training is a test of your skill sets, but also your mental toughness. And one of the things that I got to see firsthand was that a lot of what happens with the rest of the people who aren't like legit, warriors, right? Like, is they can be swayed one way or another, where courage is contagious. Like, being a coward's contagious, cowardice is contagious, but courage is also contagious. And if you got enough people who have exercised that muscle of courage, right, it gets easier and easier and easier over time until you just expect it out of yourself, right? It's not, you don't have to psych yourself up for it. You just know where you stand, and being, firm in principle and knowledge, you don't have to really do much after a certain point. It's like you did a lot of hard work up front, and then at the backside of it, that courage kind of just exudes almost naturally. So I think that, take your courageous steps. If you're scared to do something, get better at it, learn more about it, do it, and learn how to, to speak. I mean, that's one thing that I've harped on recently is learn how to, go out and give a speech, right? If you can't speak to people and you can't spread this idea of liberty's going to die.
That's a damn good point. It's a damn good point. And it's something they don't really teach you about in school, I mean, I know they have you do some presentations and stuff, but
Yeah.
like you got Ron Paul and his homeschooling, program that, like, I believe in his program, he has kids write their own stuff, and whatever they're interested, and then they present it in front of a bunch of people and they teach it to other kids. And yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if we can't articulately speak about liberty and, walk people down the road of, okay, well, what happens if you don't pay your taxes? And do you see how this is involuntary? Do you see how the state is fundamentally violent to its core, how it can't exist without violence? These fundamental things are crucial for people like us to be able to communicate with others, or else we're not going to convey a message. So, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, other than that, let me ask you this. I mean, how can people get a hold of you, or how can people follow you? Where's their social media?
Yeah. Most things are Shane T. Hazel. I think my Facebook that I don't pay enough attention to is Shane Hazel GA. And it's Shane Hazel 1 on YouTube. But Radical Pod has all the links there. It's radicalpod.com. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, they can send me an email at shane@radicalpod. And that's I run the Radical podcasts, and I'll be running, maybe if I get the nomination for governor here in Georgia in 2022. So yeah, if anybody needs to get a hold of me, I'm on all the podcatchers and all that kind of stuff, if they feel like having a listen.
I wanted to ask you about that real quick. Sorry about that.
Sure, that's all right.
What prompted you to run for governor? I mean, I know your end goal is obviously to be governor, but there are a lot of libertarians who say, well, I'm not going to give any energy in the political system, and I'm just going to fight in my own way. And what makes you want to run for governor?
Well, and I'll first say too, people who want to fight their own way, good. Don't let anybody dissuade you. Like, go fight your way, and then on top of that, don't dissuade anybody else from fighting their way. If you want to give them a tip or a trick here and there, great. But I'll tell you, this will be my third run for office. I've run for U.S. House, U.S. Senate. This will be Georgia governor. And there's just a myriad of reasons why it's a positive experience, right? Like, if you can do it and keep your soul, you learn and you meet people, and you are able to have a platform where you can talk about liberty, right? And if you like talking in front of crowds, and you like teaching people and spreading this idea and community, bringing different communities together as a real leader, not these dipshits that are in DC or in the bureaucratic offices in the state and everything else. Like, I'm talking about somebody who has walked the walk and is absolutely one of those guys that is a asset to multiple tribes, right? Like if you can be that guy that walks between tribes to bring people together where you agree on some very basic fundamentals, and you begin to heal that community, you heal your community, you heal whatever communities and tribes that you're in, and bring those guys together so that they can see, and agree and work where they can work together. I mean, you're an asset to people, man. And that's part of, what we went through in terms of training, to see it in real life applied here in America, to have the antidote for what the government's doing, to sit there and say, guys, look, man, this is simple shit, right? Let me show you something. Let me tell you something. It's, I guess, maybe just one of those things that I feel kind of called to do, is like, I've got a responsibility now that I've seen things and I know things, to help other people maybe not make the mistakes that I made, and to pay recompense for the evil shit that I did for the international government corporate banking cabal around the world. So there's a lot of work to be done, and at some point I had said, you know what, I got to get off my ass and do something. Nobody else is going to do this shit for me. So got to get up and got to do it. And luckily, a lot of things carry over from, past lifetimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I admire your tenacity. I know, as a libertarian candidate, it's not easy at all, at all. So I admire the tenacity a lot. I respect you for having the willingness to let down your ego and admit that you and I, we basically made a huge mistake. And yeah, I really appreciate having you on. It's really great to meet you and talk to you again in the future, I'm sure.
Howard, I'm absolutely, I'm blessed, and I mean this in the most, like, to have another Recon Marine now coming and doing this kind of stuff, man. And to have me on your platform, Andrew, I really, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for doing that.
For sure. Yeah, this is my first recording, so good one.
Awesome.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, man. Cheers.
Peace.